I now welcome Laureate Professor Ravi Naidu from crcCARE by video conference. And I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today? I just need to unmute.
Apologies. Thank you very much for having me with you today. My name is Professor Ravi Naidu, and I'm the Chief Executive and Managing Director of crcCARE, but also a professor with the University of Newcastle.
Thank you. I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of any remarks, I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions.
crcCARE, particularly myself, have started researching PFAS, and particularly PFAS and PFOA, in 2004, when I was then with the University of South Australia. In 2005, when crcCARE won funding and was established, PFAS and PFOA risks have expanded into much bigger than what it was in 2004. And this research was fully funded by the Australian Department of Defence. We were advised that the firefighting wastewater was being stored, and that there was a need for technology that could help remediate or clean the large volumes of PFAS or PFOS and PFOA in those days containing wastewater. Along with that, we were invited to develop strategies that would help remediate PFAS present in groundwater, the toxicity, particularly environmental toxicity linked to PFAS and PFOA, and if all went well, then to see whether we could scale up our technology. From crcCARE's perspective, we did make a rapid progress, and by 2009, we had a number of PFAS remediation plans set up at a number of sites. The sole objective of the PFAS remediation plant was to remediate fire and wastewater that was being stored. We are very pleased that crcCARE was able to clean up the stored wastewater. We then were invited to help at the airport, which we did, and we went as far as Darwin to remediate PFAS containing wastewater as well. Along with that, the research conducted by crcCARE also helped define the various impacts of PFAS, particularly PFOS and PFOA in those days, and later PFHSX as well. The impact of these on terrestrial microbiome, and indeed the fauna present in groundwater. crcCARE was the body that initiated LEMP, and having initiated that, we met with the chief executive of EPA Victoria, and we decided that state and territory EPAs would take leadership of that, and crcCARE was to firstly develop a technical guidance documents on health risks associated with exposure to PFOS and PFOA, and also strategies that we needed to put in place to manage PFAS contaminated sites. Both technical guidance documents were approved by state and territory EPAs, which is what practitioners are still using. Guidelines that we developed include the rainwater guidelines, which included in the NEMP3, but amendments 1, 2, and 3, but also terrestrial ecology, particularly from PFHSX, which we did jointly develop working with the Western Australian Department of Environment, but fully funded by BHP. Along with this, quite a number of PhD students were trained such that we had built capacity as well for graduates to work on PFAS contaminated sites. I initiated in 2015 what we call PFAS International Symposium. This was largely to bring together international researchers and also regulatory jurisdictions, representatives to Australia, was to discuss what we had from information perspective, policies, what more we need to do. That symposium is held once every 2 years, and the next one will be in 2026. Indeed, that symposium leads to a white paper or research paper that identified gaps. The latest from crcCARE is a new book, nearly 700 pages, on PFAS contamination, the sources, risk it poses, analytical methods for target and non-target compounds, and remediation as well. So with that brief overview, I'd be happy to discuss with you issues that you might have.
Thank you. I'll hand over to Senator Pratt for questions.
Thank you. Given that the types of PFAS used in Australia aren't yet implicated in an elevated cancer burden, but I don't deny that there might be one there and that it's not something to concerned about. Should we look at this study in terms of its purpose? Clearly, we know firefighters have a concern around elevated levels of PFAS. If there are long-term links, then we want the science to keep up, so it's a good thing to have a look at this right now. If you could just respond to those two issues, and then I'll come to the next question.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, for you to note that I do not come from a medical background, so my response will be based on science that I know.
Yes.
The most important thing to recognize is that there is a source exposure pathway relationship, and duration of exposure plays a very significant role as well. So if you are looking at firefighters, for example, one exposure could be because of the foam that we're using, training, for instance, or dose of fire. The second could also be what they are wearing, for instance. If they have dress clothes that they are wearing, which is aligned with, let's say, insulation, we need to be cognizant of the fact that some of these materials could also contain PFAS constituents, and these could be released. And because of the contact, for example, the exposure pathway from that contact would be far greater than exposure from firefighting foam, for instance. In Australia, we've hardly done any work relating to what people wear, for example, as it release PFAS constituents, and of course, when we have salt, for instance, particularly with sweat, its release could be enhanced as well. So there's a huge gap in knowledge from that perspective. Where insight is concerned, what we know is that PFOA has been designated as carcinogenic, but for where PFOS is concerned, there's still a bit of uncertainty. But other constituents, there's a lot more work that still needs to be done.
Okay. Does the plasma and blood donation affect the density of other carcinogens in the body, not just PFAS?
I won't answer that question. As I mentioned, I do not come from medical background.
I beg you, sorry, I didn't quite understand that.
I said I do not have medical background, so it will be difficult for me to respond to that question.
Okay, but in effect, you probably wouldn't know because you weren't looking at that.
Yes, all I can say is that it's a mixture, and the effect of mixtures could be quite different. Target gluten.
Is there any significance to this study from the point of view of therapeutic benefits of plasma and blood donation, or, you know, is it simply more reassuring to blood donors and plasma donors in case there is a relationship, but also as a long-term contribution to the science?
I think more so from the long-term contributions from science perspective, because I do not recall many studies where this has been done.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. I have a few questions also. In your submission, you state that the National Environmental Science Program maintains a national database of PFAS contamination data, which is publicly available and includes site-specific contamination, exposure pathways and potential health risks. However, even after extensive searching, my team has not able to locate this apparently publicly available national database of PFAS contamination. Could you please let us know where this can be accessed?
My apologies. I should have stated that some of this information is terminology used was wrong, but if you look at all the work that the Department of Defence has done, it's publicly available as well. I should have used national database, so my error here.
Oh, so it's not publicly available?
Yes.
But it could be available to the committee?
Yes, so my error there, I should have stated that the work that has been led by Australian Department of Defence, so the data is publicly available, and instead of, I should have used the terminology Australian Department of Defence rather than for us to with them.
Are you able to provide further detail on notice to the committee?
I'll look into that and come back to you, yes.
Thank you. You state that PFAS research is underfunded and fragmented around the country. Why do you think this is the case, and how could this be improved?
The reason I said it's underfunded and also fragmented, let's just look at fragmented, for example. We have different groups working on different things, and sometimes they're replicating as well, and we do not have a coordinating body that makes certain that rather than having different groups working on the same thing, bringing them together to make certain that we are able to address a bit more than what we're addressing right now. That's one thing. The second thing also to note is that Australia is not a tiny country. For example, New Zealand, where when you look at the environment and soil types, they're fairly similar. But Australia, going from Southern Australia to Northern Territory, the nature of soils vary quite a lot. The organic carbon content of soils vary quite a lot. And therefore, the dynamics of PFAS in these soils and also groundwater could vary quite a lot. As a consequence, the fraction that could be posing risk can vary as well. And hence, when we have different groups working, it's pretty important to bring them together to see what aspect they're working on and how we could then utilize the outcomes such that that takes into consideration the varying environmental conditions and as a consequence of that, what are the implications of their findings.
Absolutely. You have also stated concerns around industry influence in the scientific narrative for PFAS. Can you tell us some examples of this and what consequences this has had on potential government action?
Firstly, the reason I brought that up is because often, for instance, when you conduct research, and if the research is fully funded by industry, and if there is any implications from the outcome of that, where the perception is that industry has funded that research, and therefore the work that has been done is more for the benefit of the industry than the public. Now, for crcCARE, for example, when we were working, for that matter, on health screening levels for petroleum hydrocarbons, petroleum industries, when they funded and they come up with health screening levels of petroleum hydrocarbons, the related jurisdictions basically said that was done for your benefit. at which point crcCARE was engaged as an independent neutral body to make certain that we took into consideration what the regulatory predictions we were looking for, and we brought independence in the health screening levels that we derived ultimately became NAPAM as well. So that's where we are coming from. And for every industry, for example, BHP has been a very strong supporter of crcCARE. And the work that we did for BHP on threshold values, we did work with the regulatory jurisdiction, particularly the Laureate Department of Environment, took on board what is it they were looking for, made certain science underpinning the work was done well, and then the outcomes were something that the Laureate Department of Environment respected and worked from there. So where industries are concerned, it's almost always important to make certain that there is a regulatory or policy jurisdictions they are also engaged, such that we're working completely policy perspective, what is it that they are looking for. But that way, whatever we do is not wasted.
Thank you. During this inquiry, we've heard frustration from many communities, land users, farmers, water management facilities, that they have to deal with contamination they didn't cause. And while remediation efforts take place, more PFAS chemicals continue to contaminate our lands and waters. So what is the best way to address this problem at its source instead?
There are three things there. One is the source of pollutants, exposure of coffee, for example, and then receptors. Where receptors are concerned, there is an often need for us to meet with the receptors, particularly in this case, public, to brief them about what really, from exposure perspective, means from human health, and why is it that a certain concentration exceeding the threshold values they will be addressed. And most of the time, what we're looking at is concentrations are below the threshold values, but still there is the perception that is going to pose risk to the public. Where sources are concerned, yes, we got to see how we can minimize or put a bridge, put a barrier between the source and the receptors. And it's not easy, largely because when you look at catchment, for example, we find trace levels of PFAS in the catchment, and that does, for instance, drain into streams or streams into dams as well. One way of looking at that would be a risk-based approach, for instance, where we are able to block PFAS in the soils, noting that whatever approach we take should not lead to further contamination of the environment.
So given your expertise in dealing with and preventing contamination of soil and water, what are effective strategies this country should employ that have not yet been pursued in regards to preventing and dealing with PFAS?
So the first thing to take note of, and having worked on environmental contaminants for more than 30 years, and I chair the Food and Agriculture Organization, the United Nations Global Network on Pollution. I just came back from Saturday from our meeting. First thing to recognize is that there are certain contaminants, when they come into contact with soil, for instance, gradually they naturally attenuate. There are certain other contaminants, once these contaminants come into contact with the soil, for instance, or groundwater for that matter, these contaminants do not easily attenuate. PFAS falls into that class of contaminants. And equally, when you look at cadmium, for example, every farm that we have in Australia has a certain dose of cadmium. And if we do not manage cadmium, that cadmium can be taken up by whatever we grow, wheat or barley, for example, vegetable, and ultimately it can reach human. Well, what do? We can't extract cadmium from the soils, we manage. And we manage that by making certain that we convert cadmium into a form that's easily taken by plants to a form which is no longer available for plant uptake. And this is what we define as a risk-based approach, a risk management strategy So where PFAS is concerned, when the constituents once in soil, it's not easy for these to be attenuated unless we're looking at hundreds of years, but gradually it can migrate into micropores. So here we have to take a risk-based approach to see how we can convert PFAS into a form which doesn't leach, for example, and doesn't pose risk to groundwater. It's not taken up by plants, for instance. And if somebody ingests that soil, it's not released in human gut. That's a risk-based approach that, in our opinion, is most cost-effective, and it's the approach that we have been taking with cadmium. We should be able to take the same approach for that matter with PFAS as well.
Just two more questions, and we can let you go. But thank you for your evidence and expertise today. You state in your submission that there is no comprehensive approach to PFAS, which includes the variety of pathways we can be exposed to it. So what do you think should be done to address this?
First and foremost, when we look at there are certain groups of people who are deemed to be more exposed than others. And here we need to take into consideration what are the potential exposure pathways. In some cases, there are people who have used water that was contaminated, PFAS, for example, to irrigate their crops. So we need to look at the transfer of PFAS from water into soil into crops, and then how much of the vegetables, the crops that people are growing, do they ingest, for instance. So we need to be able to quantify these and look at what is the most direct exposure of PFAS for these people. And going from Southern Australia, for example, to Northern Territory, the exposure scenarios would be different for different groups of people, including the indigenous communities.
Yeah.
Now, we haven't done anything to as much detail as we need to from that perspective. Indigenous is one, and the other communities, of course, growing vegetables, for example. They might have chicken who's running around, for instance. So we need a bit more from that perspective.
Thank you. Did you have any? I've got one more question.
No, I'm fine now.
Okay. So this will be the final question, Professor. Currently, PFAS exposure mitigation is mainly limited to dealing with firefighting foams and legacy contamination from them, as well as water contamination. Which areas do you think need more attention, as they have so far been widely disregarded but could be major exposure sources for the wider population?
That's a really good question. Almost, for example, we are on a daily basis, we are all exposed to PFAS. Carpet, for example, these are the house media we have, we breathe in. But also there are many people who could be using their utensils. So if they have non-stick pots and pans that they've been using for morning, for lunch, and for dinner, for example, the exposure scenario will be much higher than, for instance, other foods that we have. And therefore, we have to reach out to people out there to brief them about the various exposure scenarios and what is it that they need to do to minimize exposure.
Well, I've thrown all of my non-stick pans out when I started this inquiry, but it's not cheap to go to the other version, the safer version. So that means people who can't afford to throw out the PFAS contaminated pots and pans are going to continue to use them. And I mean, just, my question then comes to, if you can't afford to change from the PFAS painted pots and pans, then, if you are struggling out there in a cost of living crisis, what do you do? I mean, what is the solution?
Absolutely, but then the health burden, particularly from government perspective, would be pretty high as well, because people are exposed to, particularly PFAS, for example, PFAS, and that could lead to adverse health effects, and the burden then is the therapy cost should be quite high as well. So something worth thinking about whether these people should be provided some support as well, because it's the consequence is not with their conflict, it's something that was there which most of us didn't know until it was late.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Naidu, and really appreciate you, Professor, you taking the time today. If you have undertaken to provide additional material on notice, please provide it to the Secretariat as soon as possible and no later than 5 p.m. Monday, 30 June 2025. Additionally, if you have any further information that we haven't been able to cover today, you can put that through to the Secretariat by that due date as well. And thank you for appearing today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me today. There's a lot that still needs to be done. I'll be very pleased to provide any support that you need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take a short break. We'll take a short break and come back at 3 o'clock.